He was a cynical tycoon, owner of a luxury empire, who disbelieved in the goodness and purity of love. She, a simple and dreamy young woman, with a kind heart and unwavering innocence, who went unnoticed by most. In an unexpected moment, their bodies touch, and he feels a pure energy, an aura of untouchability that paralyzes him. Shocked, he holds her firmly and with his eyes fixed on hers whispers, "You're pure." The cynical millionaire is confronted with the undeniable truth of her soul's virginity, feeling his hardened heart awaken to the possibility of real love. Watch this story until the end. You'll be amazed by it. If you like stories about love and romance, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The sound of rain drumming against the windows of the small bookstore, the book nook, echoed like a melancholic melody on a late afternoon in downtown Chicago. Clara Bennett carefully adjusted the last books on the shelves, her delicate fingers caressing the worn covers with the affection of someone who sees in each page a doorway to infinite worlds. At 24, she possessed a subtle beauty that went unnoticed by the hurried eyes of the big city. Brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, thin-rimmed glasses that framed honey-colored eyes, and a floral dress that cost less than many spent on a latte. "Clara, can you close up shop today? I need to take my mum to the doctor," asked Mrs. Henderson, the elderly owner, who treated her like a daughter since she started working there 3 years ago. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. I'll finish organizing the new books that came in," Clara replied, with the genuine smile that lit up her face even on the most difficult days. Alone in the bookstore, Clara lost herself among the volumes of poetry and romance, arranging them with the precision of a librarian and the love of a collector. Each book had its story, its journey to reach those modest shelves in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. She knew the tastes of each regular customer, knew exactly which title to recommend to cure a love disappointment or fuel a teenage dream. A few miles away, in the heart of Wall Street, Arthur Sterling signed contracts that moved millions with the same ease with which Clara arranged books. At 38, he commanded an empire that included luxury hotels, exclusive jewelry stores, and a chain of sophisticated restaurants spread across the country. His office on the top floor of a mirrored skyscraper was a reflection of his personality, cold, impeccable, and intimidating. Arthur dismissed his secretary with an impatient wave, his eyes fixed on the financial reports that confirmed another quarter of record profits. The financial success that others envied had become a gilded cage. Every woman who approached him carried in her pupils the unmistakable gleam of ambition. Every smile hid calculations about his fortune. The betrayal of his ex-fiancée 2 years before, when he discovered that she was maintaining a parallel relationship financed by his money, had been just the last straw in an ocean of disappointments. The phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. "Mr. Sterling, your presence has been requested at the Hope Foundation. There's been a problem with the donation for tonight's event," informed the efficient voice of Sarah, his personal assistant. Arthur sighed, annoyed. Attending charity events was a social obligation that kept his public image polished, nothing more. He put on his designer suit jacket and went down to the parking garage where his driver was waiting for him with the black Mercedes-Benz. The Hope Foundation occupied an old mansion in the Gold Coast neighborhood, adapted to house children in vulnerable situations. The fundraising event was already underway when Arthur arrived, and he greeted those present with the cold courtesy of someone performing a social protocol. Clara had arrived at the foundation by chance. Mrs. Henderson had been a volunteer for years, and unable to attend because of her mother's doctor's appointment, had asked Clara to bring a donation of children's books that the bookstore had set aside. Wearing her best dress, a simple navy blue that highlighted her eyes, Clara felt out of place among the expensive clothes and the glittering jewels of the guests. She was carrying 2 heavy boxes of books when she tripped on the marble staircase of the foundation. The books scattered across the entrance, and Clara lost her balance, about to fall. It was then that a firm hand held her by the arm, preventing her fall. Arthur had gone outside to answer a call when he saw the young woman trip. Instinctively, he extended his arm to support her. The moment his fingers touched the soft skin of Clara's arm, something inexplicable happened. It was as if an electric current ran through his body, but not of desire. It was something deeper, more disturbing. Clara raised her eyes, still dazed, and met Arthur's intense gaze. For a moment that seemed eternal, they remained like that. He holding her, she looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and shyness. There was something in her eyes that Arthur couldn't decipher, a purity that completely disarmed him. "Thank you," Clara murmured, delicately freeing herself from his support and crouching down to collect the scattered books. Arthur remained still for a few seconds, watching her. There was no calculation in her gestures, no attempt to impress him or call his attention. She simply collected the books carefully, as if each one were a personal treasure. "Let me help you," Arthur said, crouching down beside her. As they gathered the volumes together, their hands accidentally touched as they reached for the same book. Again, Arthur felt that strange sensation, as if he were standing before something rare and precious that he had forgotten existed. "You're not from around here," Arthur observed, his voice softer than he intended, as he handed Clara the last book collected, a copy of The Little Prince, with the pages yellowed by time. Clara held the book against her chest, as if it were a protective shield. "I brought a donation from the bookstore where I work. Mrs. Henderson couldn't come today." Her voice trembled slightly, not from romantic nervousness, but from the acute awareness that she was talking to someone clearly important, someone who didn't belong to her world of dusty shelves and afternoon teas. Arthur studied her face with an intensity that made her blush. It had been decades since he had met someone who didn't know who he was, who didn't look at him with that calculating mixture of interest and seduction. "Arthur Sterling," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Clara Bennett," she replied, hesitating before accepting the handshake. The touch was brief, but enough for Arthur to feel that strange current that disturbed him again. "Mr. Sterling!" The strident voice of Brittany Cartwright, socialite and event organizer, cut through the moment like a blade. "We've been looking for you. We have some important investors who would like to meet you." Arthur turned to Brittany, and Clara took advantage of the distraction to move away, carrying her boxes of books towards the area designated for children. But Arthur couldn't take his eyes off her, watching her distribute the books with a genuine smile that lit up her face when a child chose a title. "Who is that young woman?" Arthur asked Brittany, interrupting her conversation about investment opportunities. Brittany followed his gaze and frowned with thinly veiled disapproval. "Oh, she's just one of the volunteers. Works at a small bookstore, nothing special." "Why the interest, Arthur? You usually prefer a different caliber of company." The irritation that crossed Arthur's face was almost imperceptible, but Brittany, experienced in reading the nuances of high society, realized that she had touched on something sensitive. "She seems dedicated to working with the children," Arthur commented, keeping his tone neutral. Throughout the night, Arthur found himself looking for Clara with his eyes. She had blended completely into the environment, reading stories to the children, helping organize the activities, always with that natural smile that contrasted starkly with the studied smiles of the other women present. Clara, in turn, was painfully aware of Arthur's presence. Every time she raised her eyes, she seemed to find him watching her from afar, and the intensity of that look left her disconcerted. She knew powerful men only through books, distant and unattainable characters. Arthur Sterling was real, tangible, and there was something about his presence that made her feel simultaneously protected and vulnerable. "Clara, dear," Mrs. Davies, one of the directors of the foundation, approached her as the activities were ending. So glad you came. I have a proposal. We need someone to organize our small library. It's a volunteer job, but it would only be once a week, and you have exactly the profile we're looking for. Clara smiled, genuinely interested. It would be an honor to help. Great. And coincidence of coincidences, our biggest donor, Mr. Sterling, suggested that we needed a complete reorganization of the space. Perhaps you can work together on the project. Clara's heart raced in a way she couldn't explain. The idea of working close to Arthur terrified and excited her at the same time. Arthur, who had approached silently, overheard the conversation. That would be an excellent idea, he agreed, his deep voice causing Clara to turn around, startled. I have some ideas about how to modernize the space while maintaining the educational charm. If Miss Bennett agrees, we could meet next week to discuss the project. Clara found herself caught between the desire to accept and the awareness that she was entering unfamiliar territory. There was something in the way Arthur looked at her that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through all her carefully constructed defenses. Yes, of course, she managed to answer, her voice almost a whisper. Excellent, said Arthur, pulling a card from his pocket. My office Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. Sarah, my assistant, will have all the details. When Clara took the card, her fingers brushed Arthur's again, and she felt she was being pulled into a current she didn't know if she would have the strength to resist. Later, back home in her small apartment in Wrigleyville, Clara looked at the elegant card on her coffee table. Arthur Sterling, CEO, Sterling Group. The address on Wall Street seemed to belong to another planet. She knew she should find an excuse, cancel the meeting. Men like Arthur Sterling weren't interested in women like her without ulterior motives. But there was something in his eyes that haunted her, a deep loneliness that she recognized, a hunger for something that money couldn't buy. And against all her prudence, Clara found herself waiting for Thursday with an anxiety she couldn't name. On Thursday, Clara arrived at the mirrored building of the Sterling Group 15 minutes early, her hands sweating slightly as she held a simple folder with her notes on children's libraries. The marble and glass lobby intimidated her, but she took a deep breath, remembering the smiles of the children at the foundation as they browsed the books. Sarah, Arthur's assistant, greeted her with professional efficiency. But Clara noticed the evaluating look the woman gave her, from her faux leather shoes to the blazer she had bought on sale. Mr. Sterling is expecting you, Sarah said, leading her down a corridor that looked more like a modern art museum. Arthur was standing by the panoramic window when Clara entered, observing the city below like an emperor contemplating his domains. When he turned to greet her, she noticed that he looked different, less imposing perhaps. Or maybe she was beginning to see beyond the impeccable facade. Clara, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, more intimate. Thank you for coming. Coffee? Tea? Tea, please, she replied, settling into the leather chair he indicated. The office was exactly as she had imagined, luxurious, cold, but there was something incongruous there. An old photograph on the table, half hidden among the reports, showing a smiling boy next to a woman with gentle eyes. Arthur poured the tea into fine china, and Clara noticed that his hands were trembling almost imperceptibly. It was strange to see signs of vulnerability in someone so controlled. You're nervous, she observed, surprising herself with her own audacity. Arthur stopped, the cup halfway to his lips. No one dared to make personal observations about him. Nervous is a strong word, he replied, but there was an almost reluctant smile on his lips. Sorry, I shouldn't have... No, he interrupted, putting down the cup. It's refreshing. Most people treat me like I'm made of marble. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. You're not like most people, are you? Clara felt the heat rise up her neck. I'm very ordinary, actually. I work in a small bookstore. I live alone. My life is pretty simple. Alone. The question escaped before Arthur could control himself, revealing an interest that went beyond the professional. My parents died when I was 16, Clara said simply, without seeking pity. A car accident. Since then, learned to fend for myself. Arthur felt something stir in his chest, a familiar ache. I'm sorry, he murmured, and for the first time in years, the condolence sounded genuine. What about you? Clara asked, surprising him again. The picture on your desk. She seems important. Arthur followed her gaze to the photograph, and his expression closed instantly. My mother, he said, his voice rougher. She died when I was 12. There was something more to the story, Clara perceived. A pain that went beyond natural loss. A secret guarded so carefully that it leaked through the cracks of his emotional armor. She seems to have been a special person, Clara said softly. She was the only person who ever truly loved me. The words came out before Arthur could stop them, laden with a bitterness that surprised him. He stood up abruptly, walking back to the window. Sorry, I don't usually talk about this. Clara stood up too, moving towards him with a naturalness that defied social protocol. You don't have to apologize. Sometimes it's easier to talk to strangers. You don't feel like a stranger, Arthur said, turning to face her. They were closer now, and he could smell her subtle perfume, not an expensive fragrance, but something delicate, like wildflowers. Neither do you, to me, Clara admitted, and there was an honesty in her voice that disarmed him completely. The moment stretched between them, charged with a tension that neither knew how to name. Arthur raised his hand, almost touching her face, but stopped at the last second. Maybe we should discuss the library project, he said, his voice husky. Clara nodded, but didn't immediately move away. Arthur, she said, using his name for the first time. What happened to your mother? The truth. The question hit him like a punch to the gut. No one had ever asked directly. No one had cared enough to see beyond the official version. She killed herself. The words came out as a rough whisper. She overdosed on pills when she found out that my father had been having an affair for years. The mistress was pregnant, and he was planning to leave us. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. Arthur. Everyone said it was an accident, of course. My father bought the silence of the doctors, the press, but I knew. I found the note she had written and then torn up. I pieced it back together. He stared at her, his dark eyes laden with pain. She wrote that she couldn't live knowing that she wasn't truly loved, that she would rather die than continue to be deceived. The confession hung in the air between them, as a confession too intimate for a corporate office. Clara, without thinking, reached out and touched his arm. That's why you don't believe in love, she said, not as a question but as an understanding. Arthur looked at the small hand on his arm, feeling again that electric current that disturbed him. How can I believe? I've seen what love can do. I've seen how people lie, betray, destroy others in the name of their own desires. Not all people are like that, Clara said softly. No? Arthur turned completely to her, moving so close that she had to tilt her face up to meet his eyes. Then prove it to me, Clara Bennett. Prove to me that there is still purity in this world. 2 weeks later, Clara had become a constant presence at the Hope Foundation, reorganizing the library with a dedication that impressed even Arthur. He'd started to show up more often than necessary, using as an excuse meetings with the board or checks on the project, but really watching Clara work with the children. It was a rainy Thursday when everything changed. Clara was alone in the library, cataloguing the last donated books, when she heard shouts coming from the courtyard. Running to the window, she saw a commotion forming around the old towering oak tree that dominated the garden. Help! Gabriel climbed up the tree and can't get down, shouted one of the caregivers. Clara ran downstairs, finding a small crowd watching helplessly as the 8-year-old boy hung precariously on a high branch. Paralyzed with fear, Gabriel was one of the shyest children at the foundation, an orphan who had arrived a few months ago and was still adjusting to his new home. Have you called the fire department? Clara asked, breathless. They'll take at least 20 minutes with this traffic, replied Mrs. Davies, nervous. And the branch where he is looks fragile. I don't know if it can hold on that long. Arthur arrived at that moment, drawn by the commotion. He had cancelled an important meeting to check on the progress of the project, an excuse that was becoming increasingly frequent. He quickly assessed the situation. The boy was about 13 feet high, trembling with fear and cold. "Gabriel!" Clara shouted. "Don't move! We're going to get you down!" "I'm scared!" cried the boy. "The branch is making noise!" It was true. The old branch was slowly giving way under the child's weight, and small cracks could be heard even with the rain. "We need to do something now," murmured Arthur, taking off his suit jacket. Without hesitation, he began to climb the tree, testing each hold carefully. "Arthur, no!" Clara shouted, grabbing his arm. "It's too dangerous. You could get hurt." "And let the boy fall?" he retorted, looking her in the eyes. There was something different in his gaze, a determination that went beyond calculation, a humanity that she had only glimpsed before. "I can't do that, Clara." For the first time, Clara saw Arthur not as the powerful businessman, but as the 12-year-old boy who had found his mother dead, who had grown up promising himself never to care enough to get hurt again. And there he was, risking his life for an unknown child. Arthur climbed with surprising agility, but when he was almost reaching Gabriel, his foot slipped on the wet bark. For a terrifying moment, he hung only by his hands, swinging in the void. Clara stifled a scream, her hands covering her mouth. "I got it!" Arthur gasped, regaining his balance. He reached Gabriel and wrapped him with a protective arm. "Hey, champ, we're gonna go down together, okay?" "I'm scared," Gabriel sobbed. "Me too," admitted Arthur, surprising himself with his own honesty. "But sometimes we do things that scare us for the people we care about. And you know what? Clara is down there cheering for us." The descent was slow and dangerous, with Arthur testing each branch as he carried Gabriel. Just 6 feet from the ground, the branch where Arthur was supporting himself broke completely. He managed to push Gabriel into the outstretched arms of Mrs. Davies, but fell heavily to the wet ground. Clara was the first to reach him. Arthur was conscious, but clearly hurt, his face contorted in pain as he tried to get up. "Don't move!" Clara ordered, kneeling beside him in the mud. "You may have broken something." "I'm fine," Arthur lied, trying to sit up. The pain that shot through his ribs made him groan involuntarily. "You're far from fine," Clara said, with a firmness that surprised him. Her small hands carefully examined his left arm, looking for fractures. Her touch was gentle but precise, and Arthur found himself mesmerized by the concentration on her face. "How do you know how to do this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I took care of my parents in the last months before the accident," Clara replied simply. "I learned some first aid." The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, and Clara insisted on accompanying Arthur to the hospital. Throughout the journey, she held his hand, a simple gesture that affected him more deeply than he expected. "Why did you do that?" Clara asked when they were alone in the emergency room, waiting for the X-ray results. Arthur looked at her, still feeling the effects of the adrenaline and the pain. "I don't know," he admitted. "When I saw the boy scared, I remembered myself. No one came to save me when I needed it." Clara felt her heart break. "Arthur, you've changed me," he said suddenly, the words coming out before he could censor them. "Since I met you, I've started to feel things that I thought were impossible. You make me want to be different." Clara was silent, processing the confession. When she finally spoke, her voice was charged with emotion. "You scare me," she admitted. "Not what you did today. That was brave and beautiful, but what I feel when I'm around you scares me." Arthur reached out his good hand, gently touching her face. "Clara." It was then that the door opened abruptly, and Brittany Cartwright entered like a hurricane, followed by Sarah and a photographer. "Arthur, I heard from the hospital that you got hurt. What a terrible scare!" The camera flashed before Clara could move away, capturing the intimate moment between them. Arthur touching her face, she holding his hand, both looking at each other with an undeniable intimacy. "Brittany," Arthur said, tensing. "What are you doing here?" "Taking care of you, of course," she replied, but her eyes were fixed on Clara with a thinly veiled hostility. "And who would your nurse be?" Clara stood up quickly, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "I should go," she murmured. "No," Arthur held her hand. "Clara, "Don't go," but it was too late. The moment had been broken, and Clara knew that, with that photo, her quiet and anonymous life had come to an end. She had entered the world of Arthur Sterling, and there was no turning back. The photo appeared in Brittany Cartwright's Society column 3 days later, with the headline, "Arthur Sterling finds consolation in the arms of mysterious young woman after heroic accident." The image showed Clara and Arthur in the hospital, the intimate moment immortalized in black and white, with a caption that speculated about the tycoon's new love. Clara found out about the publication in the worst possible way, arriving at work on Monday and finding Mrs. Henderson holding the newspaper with a worried expression. "Clara, dear, you need to explain this to me," said the elderly woman, showing her the photo. "This man is he who I think he is." "Mrs. Henderson, I can explain," Clara began, but her voice died when she saw the expression of genuine shock on the face of the woman who treated her like a daughter. "Arthur Sterling, Clara, one of the richest men in the country. And you're—" Mrs. Henderson shook her head, incredulous. "My girl, do you know what you're getting into?" Before Clara could answer, the door of the bookstore opened forcefully, making the bell jingle violently. 3 women entered, Brittany Cartwright, a platinum blonde that Clara didn't know, and a journalist with a recorder in her hand. "So you're the famous Clara?" said Brittany, examining the young woman from head to toe with thinly veiled disdain. "I must say, the photo doesn't do justice to the simplicity." "Excuse me?" intervened Mrs. Henderson, placing herself protectively in front of Clara. "This is private property. I'm Vanessa Costa, from the Society column of City Spotlight," presented the journalist, ignoring Mrs. Henderson. "We would like to ask you some questions about your relationship with Arthur Sterling." "We have nothing to declare," said Clara, trying to keep her voice steady, but feeling her legs tremble. The blonde laughed, a cruel sound. "Let me introduce myself, darling. I'm Camilla Borges, Arthur's ex-fiancée, and I can give you some free advice. He gets tired of new toys quickly." Clara felt the blood freeze in her veins. This was the woman who had betrayed Arthur, who had contributed to hardening his heart. "Camilla is right," added Brittany, feigning compassion. "Arthur has a very specific pattern. Sophisticated, educated women from his social class. You seem sweet, but you clearly don't understand the world you're trying to enter." "I'm not trying to enter anywhere," replied Clara, finding courage in indignation. "I don't know what you want, but—" "We want to protect you," interrupted Camilla, approaching with a predatory smile. "See, Clara, can I call you Clara? Arthur has certain needs. He amuses himself with innocent women for a while, but always returns to his real world. And when that happens, you will be publicly humiliated." Vanessa raised the recorder. "What kind of relationship do you have? Is it true that you are a virgin? Our research indicates that you have never been seen with any man before." "Enough!" exploded Mrs. Henderson. "Get out of my store right now, or I'll call the police." "It won't be necessary," said Brittany, smiling coldly. "We've already gotten what we came for." She turned to Clara. "One last piece of advice, darling. Arthur may have money to support you for a while, but you will never be accepted in our circle. You will never be good enough for him. And when he gets tired of the novelty, you'll find that you've destroyed your life for nothing." After they left, Clara collapsed into the chair behind the counter, trembling. Mrs. Henderson approached, placing a caring hand on her shoulder. "Clara, tell me the truth. Have you gotten involved with this man?" "Not in the way they insinuate," Clara whispered. "We just met at the charity foundation. He was hurt. I accompanied him to the hospital. There's nothing more." But even as she said that, Clara knew she was lying. There was something more. Something that she herself couldn't name, a connection that went beyond casual friendship. And now that something was being exposed and distorted for the whole world to see. That night, Clara received a call from Arthur. His voice was strained, controlled. "Clara, we need to talk. Can I meet you?" "I don't think that's a good idea," she replied, remembering the cruel words of Camilla and Brittany. "Your ex-fiancé paid me a visit today. Along with her high society friends, the silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. What did they say? The truth, apparently, that I don't belong in your world, that you'll get tired of me, that I'm being used as a temporary amusement. Clara, it's not like that, isn't it? Her voice trembled. Then tell me, Arthur, what is it exactly? What are we? Because I thought we were friends, but apparently everyone sees something different. You know it's more than friendship, Arthur said, his voice low and intense. You know what's between us, do I? Clara closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten to fall. Because all I know is that a photo of us appeared in the newspaper without my permission, that women I've never seen in my life showed up at my work to humiliate me, and that my quiet life is over. And why? For a moment of weakness in the hospital. It wasn't weakness, Arthur said firmly. It was real. What I felt, what I feel for you is real. But they're right about one thing, Clara continued, ignoring his words. I don't belong in your world, Arthur. I'm just a neighborhood librarian who was deluded into thinking she could be important to someone like you. Clara, please, don't look for me anymore, she said, her voice breaking. It was a mistake for us to meet. A mistake that is costing me my privacy, my peace, maybe even my job. She hung up the phone, but it rang immediately. Clara let it ring until it stopped, then took it off the hook. On the other side of the city, Arthur punched the wall of his office, feeling the physical pain echo the emotional. They had succeeded. Camilla, Brittany, and the venomous circle of high society had poisoned Clara against him before he could even explain his own feelings. But Arthur Sterling hadn't built an empire by giving up easily. If Clara thought she could simply walk out of his life, she was very mistaken. He had found something real, pure, true, and he would not allow it to be destroyed by envy and malice. He picked up the phone and dialed Sarah. I want everything on Camilla Borges, every move she's made in the last 2 years, and I want to know who is financing these stories about my personal life. The war had begun, and Arthur was determined to protect Clara, even if it was from herself. The story came out on a Friday morning, splashed in bold letters on the front page of the city's biggest tabloid. The truth about Sterling's Cinderella, dark past revealed. Beside it, a blurred photo of Clara at 16, too thin, with eyes red from crying, leaving the hospital where her parents had died. Clara found out when she arrived at work and found a crowd of onlookers in front of the bookstore, some holding newspapers, others with cell phones raised to photograph her. Mrs. Henderson quickly pulled her inside, locking the door behind them. Don't read it, the elderly woman pleaded, but Clara had already seen the newspaper on the counter. The story was a calculated massacre. It revealed that Clara had been admitted to a psychiatric clinic for 3 months after the death of her parents, treating severe depression and self-destructive tendencies. There were anonymous quotes from sources close describing her as a disturbed young woman who took advantage of Arthur Sterling's kindness, and an opportunist who used her own tragedy to seduce a vulnerable man. But the cruelest part was at the end. A supposed medical source revealed that Clara had attempted suicide multiple times, and that she maintained obsessive correspondence with wealthy men before meeting Sterling, in a clear demonstration of predatory behavior. Every word was a meticulously constructed lie, but based on fragments of truth distorted beyond recognition. Clara had indeed been admitted, not for suicidal tendencies, but for severe malnutrition and emotional exhaustion after caring alone for her terminally ill parents while trying to finish high school. The letters mentioned were only formal correspondence with publishers trying to get work after leaving high school. It's all a lie, Clara whispered, her hands trembling as she held the newspaper. Everything distorted, manipulated. The bookstore's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted statements, onlookers asked malicious questions, and even old friends called to check if it was true. At 2 in the afternoon, the situation worsened. A news van parked in front of the bookstore, and Clara saw through the window a television crew preparing for a live broadcast. "We're going out the back," said Mrs. Henderson, grabbing her purse. "You're going to stay at my house until this passes." But when they opened the back door, they found Camilla Borges leaning against the wall of the alley, smoking a cigarette with studied elegance. "Hello, Clara," she said, smiling like a predator. "I imagine you've read the news." It was you. It wasn't a question. Clara felt a fury she had never experienced. "You invented all of this." "Invented?" Camilla feigned surprise. "Darling, I just supplemented some information that was already public. Hospital records, for example. Of course, I needed some well-placed contacts to access them. But when you have the right resources..." "You're a sick person," said Mrs. Henderson, placing herself in front of Clara. "I'm practical," retorted Camilla. "Arthur needs to be protected from himself. He's always had a savior complex, and you, dear Clara, were the perfect project. The traumatized little orphan, the untouched virgin, the lonely librarian. What a moving story." Clara felt her legs weaken. "What do you want? For you to disappear from his life?" "Definitely." Camilla threw the cigarette on the ground, stomping on it with her heel. "Arthur may think he loves you, but what he loves is the idea of saving you. And now that everyone knows who you really are, an unstable young woman with a psychiatric history, he will start to question his own judgment." "I'm not unstable," Clara said, but her own voice sounded insecure. "No? Then why are you trembling? Why are you crying?" Camilla approached, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "You know I'm right. You know you don't deserve him. And more importantly, you know that he will realize that too, sooner or later." It was at that moment that Arthur appeared at the entrance to the alley, his face transformed by fury. "Camilla, what the hell are you doing here?" "Arthur!" Camilla changed instantly, assuming an expression of concern. "I was trying to help. Poor Clara is being harassed by the press because of you." Arthur completely ignored Camilla, walking straight to Clara. "Are you okay? I saw the news. It's all a lie, I know it is." Clara stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, but Camilla's words echoed in her mind. "Arthur, you don't understand. They're never going to stop. Your ex-fiancé, your friends, the entire society. They're going to destroy me piece by piece until you yourself start to doubt me." "That's never going to happen," Arthur said firmly, trying to take her hands. "It's already happening," Clara exploded, pulling away from him. "Don't you see? Every time we appear together, every innocent gesture between us becomes a headline. They turned my personal tragedy into public entertainment. They made my stay in the clinic, where I was just trying to recover from the death of my parents, seem like I was crazy, dangerous. Clara, please. And the worst thing is that part of me believes they're right," she continued, the tears finally falling. "I'm just a neighborhood librarian. You're Arthur Sterling. What are we doing together? What did I think was happening between us?" "You know what's happening," Arthur said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You know that I love you." The words hung in the air like a confession torn from the soul. Camilla stifled an exclamation of anger. Mrs. Henderson put her hand to her chest, and Clara felt the world stop. "Don't say that," Clara whispered. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." "It's the truth," Arthur insisted. "I love you, Clara. I love your kindness, your purity, the way you see the world. I love how you made me remember that there is still beauty in this world." "But I can't love you back," Clara screamed, the pain tearing her voice. "I can't because it will destroy us. It will destroy you, your reputation, your empire. And it will destroy me too, because I'm not strong enough to live being hated by everyone you know." "Clara, no." She shook her head violently. "It's over, Arthur. Whatever there was between us, it's over. I can't anymore. I can't live being turned into a public scandal every time you look at me." Clara turned and ran down the alley, leaving Arthur standing there with a shattered heart. She didn't see Camilla approach him with a triumphant smile. Nor did she hear when she whispered, "It was better this way, Arthur. She would never have been strong enough for our world." Arthur kept looking at where Clara had disappeared, feeling as if an essential part of himself had been torn away. For the first time in 26 years, since the death of his mother, Arthur Sterling cried. A week after the confrontation in the alley, Clara had become a recluse in her own apartment. Mrs. Henderson had temporarily closed the bookstore for renovations, but in reality, to protect Clara from the journalists who were still surrounding the place. The young woman spent her days looking out the window, seeing the normal lives of people on the street, and wondering if she could ever return to having an anonymous existence. It was on a Tuesday afternoon that Mrs. Henderson arrived with a determined expression that Clara had not seen before. "Clara, dear, we need to talk," said the elderly woman, placing a thick folder on the kitchen table. "I found some things you need to see." "Mrs. Henderson, I already said I don't want to talk about Arthur anymore, or—" "It's not about Arthur," the woman interrupted, opening the folder. "It's about the truth, and about you discovering what kind of person you really are." Clara approached reluctantly. The folder contained newspaper clippings, internet printouts, and various notes in Mrs. Henderson's neat handwriting. "I spent the week investigating," explained the elderly woman. "I called old contacts, talked to people, searched archives, and I discovered something interesting about our dear Camilla Borges." Clara picked up one of the clippings. It was a news story from 2 years before. "Heiress loses family fortune in bad investments. Borges family on the verge of bankruptcy." "Camilla isn't the rich woman she appears to be," continued Mrs. Henderson. "Her family lost everything. Her father invested in a Ponzi scheme and took the entire fortune with him. She only maintains appearances because she still has some assets in her name that haven't been confiscated." Clara flipped through other documents. There were records of debts, lawsuits, even an eviction order that had been suspended at the last minute. "But what does this have to do with me?" Clara asked. "Everything," said Mrs. Henderson, pulling out another document. "Look who is financing the stories against you." Clara followed the woman's finger to a small footnote on a newspaper invoice. The payment had been made by a company called Borges Investments LLC. "Camilla is spending the last resources she has to destroy you," explained Mrs. Henderson. "And do you know why? Because she desperately needs Arthur to come back to her, not for love, for money. She's broke, Clara. And Arthur is her only way out." Clara felt a mixture of anger and sadness. "This doesn't change anything, Mrs. Henderson. Even if she's lying, even if she's made up half of the things, people believed it. My reputation is destroyed." "Is it really?" Mrs. Henderson smiled mysteriously. "Because I received some interesting calls this week." She pulled out a sheet with notes. "Dr. Harrison, the psychiatrist who treated you at 16, he was outraged by the lies published and wants to give an interview clarifying that you were never suicidal, only in deep mourning and malnourished. He said you were one of the bravest patients he ever treated." Clara felt her eyes fill with tears. "Professor Mallory from your old high school," continued Mrs. Henderson, "wants to testify about how you took care of your parents alone while maintaining the best grades in the class. And there's more. The nurse who cared for your parents in the last month, Sister Agnes, was furious to hear the lies. She said you were an exemplary daughter." "Mrs. Henderson, and do you know who else called?" The elderly woman smiled maliciously. "Gabriel, the boy Arthur saved from the tree. His mother saw the news and was outraged. She wants to tell everyone how you cared for her son in the hospital, how you were kind and caring. She said you're an angel." Clara sat heavily in the chair, processing everything. "But why would they do this? Why would they care about defending me?" "Because you touched their lives, Clara, because true kindness leaves marks on people. And now that they've seen you being attacked unfairly, they want to repay the good you've done." Mrs. Henderson leaned over the table, taking Clara's hands. "My dear, you've spent the entire week hiding, thinking you were weak, that you didn't deserve Arthur's love. But look around you. Look how many people are willing to fight for you. That won't change what high society thinks of me, Clara murmured. And since when do you care what high society thinks? Mrs. Henderson retorted firmly. The Clara I know never cared about that. The Clara I know always knew that a person's worth isn't in their bank account, but in their heart. Clara was silent for a long moment, flipping through the documents. Slowly, a flame that had gone out inside her began to flicker again. "What do you think I should do?" she asked finally. Mrs. Henderson smiled. "I think you should stop running and start fighting. Not for Arthur, at least not yet, but for yourself, for your dignity, for your truth." That night, Clara called Dr. Harrison, then Sister Agnes, then Professor Mallory. One by one, she talked to the people who had offered help, and slowly a plan began to form. The next morning, Clara woke up with a determination she hadn't felt in weeks. She dressed carefully. Not her best dress, but her most comfortable clothes, the ones that made her feel like herself. She tied her hair in a simple ponytail and looked at herself in the mirror. "You're not a victim," she said to her reflection. "You're Clara Bennett. You survived the death of your parents, recovered from depression, built a decent life, and you're not going to let a desperate woman destroy all of that." She picked up the phone and dialed Vanessa Costa, the journalist who had participated in the first ambush at the bookstore. "Vanessa, it's Clara Bennett. I want to give an interview, but it will be on my terms, in my location, with my witnesses. And this time, you're going to hear the whole truth." On the other end of the line, she could feel the journalist's excitement. "Clara, that's great. When can we—" "Tomorrow, at 3 in the afternoon, at the Hope Foundation. And Vanessa, if you try to ambush me again or distort my words, I'm going to sue you and the newspaper for libel and defamation. Is that clear?" After hanging up, Clara sat down and began to write. Not a rant or a desperate defense, but her story. The whole truth about who she was, where she came from, and why she wasn't ashamed of any of it. As she wrote, Clara didn't know that a few miles away, Arthur was in his office facing a crisis of his own. After a week immersed in work to try to forget the pain, he had finally decided to investigate the lies about Clara on his own. And what he had discovered had made him furious enough to do something he never imagined possible: completely destroy Camila Borges. The war was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter its most decisive phase. Clara's interview aired on a Thursday night, in prime time. Seated in the library of the Hope Foundation, surrounded by her witnesses, she told her story with a serenity that impressed even the most experienced cameramen. Dr. Harrison explained in detail Clara's treatment, making it clear that she had been admitted for pathological grief and malnutrition, not for suicide attempts. Sister Agnes cried as she described how Clara had cared for her parents with a dedication that she had never seen in someone so young. Professor Mallory showed Clara's school report cards, proving that she had maintained academic excellence even in the most difficult circumstances. But it was Gabriel, the boy Arthur had saved from the tree, who gave the most touching testimony. At just 8 years old, he looked directly into the camera and said, "Miss Clara is good. She reads us stories and always brings sweets. Why are people being mean to her?" The public's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media was filled with messages of support, apologies, and outrage against the yellow journalism that had distorted Clara's story. Hashtags like "Justice for Clara" and "Truth Prevails" began to circulate. Arthur watched the interview alone in his office, feeling his chest tighten with every word Clara spoke, when she said in a firm but emotional voice, "I'm not ashamed of who I am or where I came from. I'm not ashamed of having needed psychiatric help after losing my parents. And I will no longer allow them to turn my story of overcoming into a reason for humiliation." He knew that he had lost more than he imagined by letting her go. The next morning, Arthur was in his office when Sarah announced an unexpected visitor. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Camila Borges is here. She says it's urgent." Arthur raised his eyes from the documents he was analyzing, a pile of evidence about Camilla's lies that he had spent the week compiling. "Send her in." Camilla entered the office as she always did, confident, elegant, calculating. But Arthur noticed something different in her eyes, thinly veiled desperation. "Arthur, darling," she began, approaching the table, "I came to apologize. Perhaps I was excessive in my concern for you." "Excessive?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, observing her coldly. "Is that what you call lying, bribing journalists and trying to destroy an innocent woman?" Camilla's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. "I don't know what you're talking about." Arthur opened a folder and spread documents on the table. Payment invoices to the newspaper, records of your calls to Brittany Cartwright coordinating the attacks on Clara. Even the recording of your conversation with the fake doctor who invented the lies about her psychiatric history. Camilla paled, but tried to maintain her composure. "Arthur, you don't understand. I did this for us. That woman wasn't suitable for you. She was everything you never were." Arthur interrupted, standing up. "Honest, pure, genuine, everything you destroyed in me, she brought back to life." "Arthur, please," Camilla approached, trying to touch him, but he moved away. "We can go back to what we were. We can—" "You're broke," Arthur said coldly. "I know about your debts. I know you're desperate. And I know that you plan to use me to get back on your feet financially, exactly as you did 2 years ago when you betrayed me with my own partner." Camilla recoiled as if she had been slapped. "How did you—" "I found out that you never broke up with Ricardo. I found out that you planned everything. The affair with me, the engagement, even your supposed betrayal. You wanted access to my companies, to my contacts. When you realized that I wasn't as easy to manipulate as you imagined, you devised the plan of betrayal to leave me devastated and vulnerable." Arthur approached her, and Camilla saw in his eyes a controlled fury that terrified her. "But you know what your mistake was, Camilla. Attacking Clara. When you touched her, you touched the only pure thing I've found in this world, and now you're going to pay for it." "What do you mean?" Camilla whispered. "I mean that I just sent all this evidence to the police and the press. I mean that your creditors received a complete copy of your financial crimes. And I mean that you will never get close to me or Clara again." Camilla collapsed into the chair, her face transformed by panic. "Arthur, you can't do this to me. We had a history. You had no history with me," Arthur said with finality. "You had a business plan, and now that plan has completely failed." That afternoon, Arthur went to the Hope Foundation. He found Clara in the library, organizing books with the same delicacy as always, but there was something different about her. A strength, a dignity that made her even more beautiful. "Clara," he said softly. She turned around, and for a moment he saw all the pain he had caused reflected in her eyes. "Arthur, what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," he said. "And I came to tell you the truth about Camilla, about everything." Arthur told her everything, about the discovery of the lies, about Camilla and Ricardo's plan, about how she had been used as a pawn in a cruel game of revenge and greed. "I should have investigated before," he said, his voice laden with remorse. "I should have protected you better. I should have believed in you from the first moment." Clara listened to him in silence, processing every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Arthur," she said finally, "you don't need to apologize for not protecting me. I didn't need to be protected. I needed to be respected. And when I was asked to choose between hiding or fighting for my truth, I chose to fight." "I saw your interview," Arthur said, his eyes shining with pride. "You were amazing, brave, dignified, true, exactly as I always knew you were." "And now?" Clara asked. "What happens now?" Arthur came closer, stopping a few inches from her. "Now I ask you if you can forgive me, if you can give me a chance to prove that I truly love you, not the idea I have of you, but who you really are, the strong woman who faced the press, who survived the tragedy, who turned pain into kindness." Clara studied his face, seeing beyond the wealth and power, the man who had risked his life to save a child, who had cried as he confessed his love in the alley. "Arthur," she said, raising her hand to gently touch his face, "I forgive you, and I love you too. Not the tycoon, not the savior, but the man who showed me that there is still purity in this world, the purity of true love." When Arthur kissed her, there between the shelves of the library where it had all begun, Clara knew that she had found not only love, but herself. And Arthur knew that he had found not only a woman, but the redemption of his soul. 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the Hope Foundation, surrounded by the children that Clara loved so much, and by the people who had fought alongside her for the truth. Mrs. Henderson cried with joy, Gabriel threw flower petals, and Dr. Harrison toasted to the love that heals all wounds. Arthur discovered that true wealth was not in his business, but in Clara's smile every morning. And Clara discovered that her purity was not fragility, but strength. The strength to love completely, to forgive generously, and to transform even the most hardened heart. Together, they proved that true love is not only possible, but inevitable when two pure souls meet. And that sometimes it is necessary to go through the deepest darkness to discover that the light has always been there, waiting to be found.